Hello, and welcome to episode 4 of my Thameslink series. In this series, I'm exploring the history of Thameslink, its operators since privatisation, and the current state of the railway. Today marks the first episode covering the Thameslink and Great Northern operators, as part of the wider Thameslink Southern and Great Northern franchise, also known as GTR. As we're focusing purely on Thameslink here, I'll be avoiding Southern and Gatwick Express for now, whilst also including Great Northern, since it's highly integrated into the Thameslink network. Across the 2 episodes on Thameslink and Great Northern, we'll be examining whether these operators have been a success or a failure, as well as assessing Thameslink's overall success since its inception in 1989 and the effectiveness of the Thameslink 2000 upgrades. In today's episode, we'll be looking at Thameslink and Great Northern from the start of GTR operations in September 2014 up until the beginning of 2018. If you enjoy this video, please do consider liking, subscribing, or even joining my channel membership or Patreon from as little as 99p a month to help support my work. Thank you, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Let's start with a quick overview of what Thameslink was and how this led to the formation of Govia Thameslink Railway, or GTR. Thameslink was first conceived in the late 1970s and early 1980s, when Margaret Thatcher's government and the Greater London Council allocated around £5 million to open a stretch of track linking Farringdon to Blackfriars. This allowed services operated by new dual-voltage Class 319s to commence operations between Bedford and Brighton under the Network South East brand in 1988, initially running via the Central London Core. The service was a huge success, later being expanded to Wimbledon and Sutton in the early 1990s, before being privatised under the Thameslink name by Govia, who made few changes to the network. In April 2006, First Capital Connect took over operations, amalgamating the Thameslink and Great Northern lines out of King's Cross into one company. FCC introduced the first 12-car trains on Thameslink, refurbished the rolling stock, and worked with Network Rail on the Thameslink programme, a major upgrade project to allow up to 24 trains per hour in each direction through the core. I covered all this in my previous 3 episodes, so do check those out. In 2012, the Department for Transport confirmed plans to amalgamate the Southern and Gatwick Express franchises with Thameslink and Great Northern, creating a new mega franchise. This franchise, awarded to Go Ahead and Keolis under the Govia name, branding themselves as GTR, was a management contract. Fare income would go directly to the Department for Transport, whilst GTR would receive a flat payment of £8.9 billion over 7 years. This approach was taken to ensure financial stability during the Thameslink programme upgrades, which included major disruptions like the redevelopment of London Bridge. GTR's franchise, commencing on September 2014, would be split into 4 sub-brands: Thameslink, Great Northern, Southern and Gatwick Express. However, today's focus is solely on Thameslink and Great Northern. GTR began operations on the 14th of September 2014, covering over 230 stations. Southern and Gatwick Express would be formally incorporated into the new franchise in July 2015. By 2014, the Thameslink programme was well underway. Major reconstruction work had already been completed at London St Pancras, Farringdon and Blackfriars, with London Bridge upgrades starting in 2013. Stations across the Thameslink network were already receiving platform extensions to accommodate new 12-car Class 700 trains built by Siemens as part of their Desiro family. Construction was also progressing on the canal tunnels, linking lines out of King's Cross to the Thameslink network and enabling future services from Cambridge and Peterborough through the core to Brighton or Sutton. Plans were also in place for Thameslink services to eventually reach Ashford, East Grinstead, Horsham and Littlehampton, alongside major upgrades to the core signalling system. As for routes, Thameslink services would initially run from Sevenoaks, Orpington, Sutton and Brighton through the core via Blackfriars and St Pancras towards Luton and Bedford. Great Northern would operate out of King's Cross and Moorgate towards Hertford North, Welwyn, Letchworth, Peterborough, Cambridge and King's Lynn. In terms of rolling stock, Thameslink inherited nearly 30-year-old Class 319 EMUs and more newer Class 377s. Both were due to be replaced by the incoming Class 700s. The Class 319s were set to transfer to Northern, while the 377s were initially expected to move to Great Northern. Great Northern, on the other hand, would inherit a mix of Class 321s, Class 365s, Class 317s and 313s, with the latter operating services on the Moorgate branch. As part of franchise commitments, Thameslink ordered 36 Class 387-1s to temporarily replace some of the Class 319s between Bedford and Brighton before the arrival of the Class 700s, after which the Class 387s were transferred to another operator. Anyway, on to Thameslink and Great Northern's history from the 14th of September 2014. As part of the new franchise, GTR promised a series of improvements across the network, which would take place from 2014. These included a refresh of all 239 stations that GTR managed, including major redevelopments for St Albans and Luton to improve disabled access, increasing staffing hours at the busiest 100 stations, the extension of the Key, which was Severn's smart card system, to the whole GTR network, providing Thameslink and Great Northern stations with free Wi-Fi, and £1.5 million of upgrades, including new lighting, increased cycle storage, and step-free access, with stations such as Harpenden receiving some of these upgrades. GTR promised a series of service enhancements too. For Great Northern, these included half-hourly services from King's Cross to London, more services to Tattenham Corner, Caterham, Horsham, Enfield and New Barnet, as well as services to Moorgate at weekday evenings and weekends for the first time. As for Thameslink, GTR would double the overnight services, providing an at least hourly service throughout the core 24 hours a day, and more 7/8 services, including Saturday services. November 2014 provided an update on the new Class 387s for Thameslink. Although legally they would be delivered to Southern, they were always initially meant for Thameslink as a stopgap for the Class 700s, which would be slightly delayed entering service. This delay could have caused knock-ons for Northern, who were expecting the Class 319s for newly electrified services in the northwest. However, the Class 387s would allow these Class 319s to be delivered to Northern on time, and by November they were already going through the refurbishment into Northern interiors and Northern livery. GTR confirmed the new 29 4-car Class 387-1s would operate fast services between Bedford and Brighton, with, by November, 12 of the 29 units already being built, and some already on test out of Bletchley. The trains would have a top speed of 110 miles an hour, and would enter service by May 2015, Ian Nairn, head of project management, said. In 2014, Thameslink and GTR still didn't know the future for the new 387s after Thameslink, with some rumours circulating that they could move to the Great Western Main Line or Midland Main Line following their electrifications. In 2014, the Class 377-5s with Thameslink were expected to move to Great Northern, not the Class 387s. March saw London Bridge Station come under fire for having severe crushes due to upgrade works limiting the amount of gate lines. People were pictured having to jump or climb under barriers to avoid being crushed in the evening peaks, with further disruption on one Tuesday night following a person being hit by a train, leading to even more people being crammed onto the concourse, with the RMT union claiming the situation was life-threatening. Things would go from bad to worse for commuters in January, when all Thameslink trains were diverted via Herne Hill and not London Bridge, from January 2015 all the way to May 2018, in order for London Bridge to receive upgrade works for the Thameslink programme. These included new through platforms installed. South Eastern services were also affected, whilst lines were upgraded to allow some services going to Cannon Street and Charing Cross to stop at London Bridge. Some things had got better for the firm when, by July, all Class 387s had entered service with Thameslink, allowing for the beginning of the withdrawal of the 86 4-car Class 319s, though most would remain with the firm until at least late 2016. In August of 2015, Thameslink operated a charter Class 319 service for the Royal Marsden and Royal Brompton hospitals, raising £9,000. The Thameslink Tracker service, on August the 14th, ran between Bedford and Blackfriars, via several depots and sidings, which passenger services would not normally use. The privilege of riding back from Blackfriars to Bedford in the cab was sold at, fittingly, £319. October 2015 saw Southern's Key Smart Card extended to Thameslink services. It would now mean that Southern passengers from Brighton who used the Key to commute to work could now use the Smart Card on Thameslink trains as well. David Innes, commercial director for GTR, said that this would help make travel smarter and easier, with GTR also developing a CarNet product to help flexible part-time workers. November saw the first Class 700 make a successful test run to Brighton. 700-107, one of the 12-car variants, and 3 times as long as some of the older Class 319s, performed excellently, according to Thameslink Programme Director Keith Wallace, who also highlighted how the units would venture as far as Peterborough and Cambridge from around 2018. The Class 700s would hopefully enter service by spring 2016, as confirmed by Siemens Programme Director David Hooper. The rollout of the new dual-voltage trains, as part of the Thameslink programme, would provide 80% more peak seats across the core, as well as allowing for 24-hour operations for the first time. In December, Govia Thameslink Railway announced that they would be freezing most fares, as well as the season ticket caps, to the rate of inflation, at just 0.8%, meaning most tickets would only rise by a marginal amount. Thameslink announced in January 2016 that their Cricklewood sidings would go through a £40 million regeneration. The regenerated facility in North London would now feature a new drive-through train wash and new yards for stabling trains, to allow them to receive more in-depth interior cleaning, accommodating up to 22 trains. The site would be regenerated by now defunct constructor Carillion and would, at its peak, be expected to remove up to a ton of rubbish from trains per day. February saw important news for Great Northern as GTR announced that they had struck a deal with Siemens for 25 six-car trains to replace the Class 313s, which were built from 1976 and 77, and at the time were the oldest electric trains still operating in mainland Britain. The new Siemens Desiro trains would operate from Moorgate and would include air conditioning, real-time information systems, better accessibility, power points throughout, and would increase capacity with inter-vehicle gangways. The trains would hopefully enter service by late 2018 and would, by June 2016, be designated Class 717s. Early 2016 also saw confirmation of the futures for the current Thameslink Class 377s and Class 387s. The former would move to South Eastern to replace some of the oldest networkers, Class 465s and 466s, whilst the Class 387s would head north, slightly, to Great Northern to replace the older Class 317s, 321s and 365s. However, February saw GTR ranked as the worst train operator in the UK, tied with South Eastern, and specifically the Thameslink and Great Northern sectors, who received an overall score of satisfaction of just 46%. Passengers said that poor value for money and dirty trains were the worst issues for the operator in the survey, which was ran by Which. June 2016 was a busy month for Thameslink and Great Northern, with some good news and some bad. Firstly, Siemens and Thameslink confirmed that the Class 700s would begin operating on the Great Northern routes to Cambridge and Peterborough by mid-2017, initially to and from London King's Cross, before running through the new canal tunnels from the core in 2018, formally connecting Peterborough and Cambridge to the rest of the Thameslink network. As well as this, the new control room at London Bridge, housing 240 staff, officially opened, marking a big step towards the completion of the London Bridge upgrade, with half of the new concourse now open to the public by August. However, things started to go downhill in late June, when GTR's performance plummeted even further, despite already being deemed the UK's worst rail company. Matters were made worse when it was confirmed that the boss of GTR was being paid £2.1 million a year, despite offering a terrible service. David Brown saw his salary rise £200,000 from 2014 to 16, sparking fury among union members, politicians and passengers alike. A survey found that GTR overall was the UK's most unreliable operator, with the Department for Transport rejecting pleas from MPs for a review of operations. Instead, the DfT issued GTR a whopping £2 million fine, despite being paid nearly £9 billion to run the franchise, which equated to just 0.02% of the public money GTR was being paid to run the service. The poor service on Thameslink hit parent company Govia, and especially Go Ahead, whose shares closed 18% lower on the 14th of June due to lower profits expected, partly due to the fine. However, the 24th of June finally saw some good news for passengers. The Class 700s would finally enter service, slightly delayed. 700-108, one of the 55 12-car Class 700s to be built, entered service from Brighton to London Bridge and would allow for the Class 319s, 377s and 387s to begin to be replaced. Rollout would be relatively slow, with just one unit in service for the first week or so of operations, but the first 8-car Class 700 would be rolled out by August. The new trains, apart from having much greater capacity, did have some more benefits. Thameslink confirmed that the first class at the rear of the trains would always be declassified, in order to allow for passengers to charge devices and utilise tables, with the standard class not having plug sockets or large tables, something which was criticised by passengers, along with the uncomfortable seats which the Class 700s had, designated as ironing board seats by passengers and enthusiasts alike. Regardless, the new 700s would be miles better than the older, more unreliable and less spacious Class 319s, and would allow for the expansion of the network in due course. Regarding this network expansion, in September, Thameslink launched a consultation on the biggest timetable shake-up in a generation. The new timetable would propose running peak time services between Littlehampton and central London, as well as East Grinstead to Bedford. By this point, more and more Class 700s were being introduced, meaning that there were only a few Class 319s remaining on the Thameslink network. October saw the first Class 387s transferred to Thameslink, entering service between King's Cross and Cambridge on the 13th, marking the beginning of the end of the Class 317s and 321 operations out of King's Cross. The Class 700s and 717s would shortly also be making their debuts out of King's Cross by the end of 2018. However, the Class 717s were running slightly behind schedule and were now anticipated for entry at 2019 at the latest. August saw relief for London Bridge passengers, as most of the brand new concourse was opened, with the station, used by up to 55 million passengers a year, now becoming slightly less crowded. In November, The Class 700s made their debut on the Wimbledon-Sutton Loop lines, as well as stopping services from St Albans and Luton, offering passengers a more modern journey into London. Jerry McFadden, engineering director, was delighted that the first Class 700s were now operating on the whole network, with more to follow, replacing the old trains. December 2016 saw the Class 700's new depot in Hornsey open, which would maintain the new £1 billion fleet, in what would be the UK's biggest train depot. The depot would not just look after the 700s, but also the new Class 387s and 717s. December also marked the first 8 Class 377s moving to South Eastern, whilst the last Class 321s were withdrawn and replaced by 387s, with the 321s moving to Glasgow to be converted to Class 320s for £8 million, and working on the suburban services around Scotland's second city. By the May 2017 timetable change, Great Northern confirmed that their new Class 387s would now begin to operate on the Fen line to Cambridge. This marked the end of the line for the Great Northern Class 317s, who were replaced following 36 years of operations out of London King's Cross. Soon after, in August, the last Class 319s operated with Thameslink. The 27th of August saw 319-217 and 319-435 operate with Thameslink for the last time, operating a southbound service to Brighton. The units have been operating with Thameslink since the very beginning, from 1988, and after 30 years, bowed out of operations due to the quick introduction of the new Class 700s. Some 319s would head north to Northern, whilst others would work with London North Western Railway. The rest would be converted by Porterbrook into the infamous Class 769s. Thameslink also confirmed that the Class 377s would be withdrawn by September, meaning that soon, just Class 700s would operate on the network. This meant that, in terms of legacy fleet for Great Northern and Thameslink, just the Class 313s and 365s survived. The 365s were targeted next, however, with Class 700s beginning service at Outer King's Cross from October the 2nd, replacing 21 of the 40 Class 365s, with the remaining 19 remaining with the firm for the time being. The new Thameslink services would initially replace 2 sets of Class 365s from Peterborough to King's Cross, eventually running from Cambridge and Peterborough through the core by December 2018, when the Thameslink programme would be finalised. September the 18th saw the first day of full Class 700 Thameslink operations, with it being the first weekday where only Class 700s were used. The new fleet had gone down relatively well with passengers, severely reducing overcrowding, with Govia Thameslink Railway's engineering director, Jerry McFadden, saying that new trains meant capacity would almost triple off-peak, and thousands more passengers were due to be added to the Thameslink network by the end of 2018. However, the overall £7.5 billion Thameslink programme was, by November, behind schedule and would not be finished before 2020. Despite major benefits planned for May 2018, boosting capacity for 35,000 passengers at peak hours, this would not allow for full 24 train per hour service until at least December 2019, while signalling systems were still being upgraded. The Class 700s also had to run tests for their new signalling systems, which would mean automatic trains through the core. Network Rail said the project had overrun, price-wise, by around 10%, with £900 million more being needed to ensure reliable services. Fast trains linking Ashford and Maidstone through Thameslink will be put off until at least December 2019, or may never commence, meaning the full 24 trains per hour frequency for Thameslink was still in doubt. Regardless, Charles Horton, GTR Chief Executive, said the new timetable from 2018 would transform the network, providing up to 70% of the overall Thameslink network capacity benefits to the network. By the turn of the year, in January 2018, it was confirmed that fares would be rising by 3.4% on the Govia Thameslink Railway network, and the whole UK network for that matter, the highest rise in 5 years. Commuters claimed that fares had gone up relentlessly for a service that wasn't improving. On average, commuters would spend 13% of their salary on rail travels, versus just 2% in France. However, for Thameslink passengers, things weren't all doom and gloom. London Bridge Station fully reopened on the 2nd of January 2018, with upgrades allowing the station to serve 96 million passengers a year and up to 50 trains an hour, with 5 new platforms opened, whilst the station received huge modernisation works, making it one of the, in my opinion, nicest stations in the UK. Thameslink services would resume from London Bridge from May 2018. January 2018, the midpoint of GTR's operations currently, seems like a decent place to round off today's video, with lots more to cover in part 2 of this Thameslink Great Northern mini-series. So then, in their first 4 years of operations, should Thameslink and Great Northern be deemed a success or a failure? In my opinion, they did more good than bad. The introduction of the new Class 700s for Thameslink and Class 387s for Great Northern ensured that the ageing legacy British rail fleet would be withdrawn, but poor reliability and customer satisfaction did plague the company. Could they improve after 2018 though? I guess you have to find out in the next video. I hope you've enjoyed today's video. If so, do consider liking and subscribing, and possibly even joining the channel. Special thanks to my first class members AB and Crispin McKee, as well as my business zone members Andrew Bowen, Anthony Harris, Anthony James Moore, ARK, Connor Grieg, Clive's Travelling Trains, Craig Mitchell 43, Daniel Catton, Dave CDF, Gordon Walker, Jay Teco, JBNEL, Lewis C21, NJTE, Real, Scott Wheeler, That Transport Girl and Will Ho, as well as all my standard premium members and standard class members. Your support means a lot to me, so thank you very much. You can get your name on this list from as little as £2.99 a month, or support me from as little as 99p a month, on YouTube or on Patreon. I hope you've enjoyed today's video. Massive thanks to everyone who's let me use their footage for today's video. It means so much, and their links are in the description below. Once again, do consider liking and subscribing if you've enjoyed. Check out my Discord server, Twitter, and Blue Sky links in the description below. And I'll see you in the next episode. Goodbye.